Imagine, right? The world's most secretive, proud tech company.
Right.
Like a company that literally built a multi-billion-dollar ring-shaped glass headquarters
Yeah.
just so they could tightly control their own image.
Yeah, the whole spaceship campus thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when they launch a new product, there is this entire massive machine dedicated to making sure you know about it.
Oh, yeah.
They drop this huge glossy press release in their newsroom. Executives stand on a beautifully lit stage, and they tell you how they've just, revolutionized your life.
The classic keynote.
But now, imagine that exact same company quietly admitting defeat in the most important technological race of the century.
It's pretty wild.
They didn't put it on a billboard. They didn't issue a press release at all. They just slipped an announcement onto their biggest rival's website, like almost hoping no one would even notice.
Yeah, I mean, it is the digital equivalent of sliding a note under a door in the middle of the night and just sprinting away.
That is exactly what it felt like.
And, well, that note contained a massive concession. Apple basically admitted they could not build their own large language models, and they are now going to rely on Google's Gemini models to power their next generation of foundation models.
Wow.
For a company that prides itself on owning every single piece of its technology stack, that is a staggering surrender.
We need to define foundation model for a second here because that term gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah,
We aren't just talking about a single app. A foundation model is the core AI brain, right? The underlying engine trained on massive amounts of data that can be adapted to do almost anything.
Right, from writing code to generating images to summarizing your life.
Exactly. And when you look at the landscape, OpenAI, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, all these companies have successfully developed their own foundation model. So
Right.
Apple's absence is just glaring.
Which brings us to the core of what we're looking at today. We are pulling from a meticulous breakdown by the YouTube channel called Apple Explained.
Yeah, great channel.
Specifically, a piece titled, Apple Has Failed at Artificial Intelligence. Again.
So the mission here, our goal for this deep dive, is to explore the perfect storm of historical blunders and deep-seated cultural weaknesses that caused one of the richest companies on earth to fall spectacularly behind.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you don't just wake up one morning and concede the future of computing to Google.
No, you definitely don't.
To understand this silent surrender today, we have to rewind the clock roughly 15 years and look at a foundational failure. We have to talk about Siri.
Ah, yes. Siri.
Source material doesn't sugarcoat this at all. The specific phrasing they used is that Siri sucks and has sucked for the past 11 years.
That's pretty blunt, but accurate.
Right. And the technical reason behind this is something called NLP brittleness, natural language processing brittleness.
Right, and that brittleness is the exact reason you constantly find yourself yelling at your phone.
Guilty.
NLP brittleness happens when a system just shatters the moment you don't speak to it with perfect robotic syntax. Like you have to talk to it like a computer.
Exactly. The source highlights a phenomenal example from a device running iOS 17.
Okay.
If you ask Siri, what time zone is Las Vegas? It works perfectly. Gives you the Pacific time zone.
Right.
But if you add one tiny preposition at the very end and ask, what time zone is Las Vegas in? The entire system breaks down.
It's from the word in?
Yes.
So yeah.
It hits a wall and replies, sorry, I can't help with that, but you can ask me the time in a specific city.
How is it even possible that the smartest phone in my pocket gets utterly confused by the word in?
Well, because underneath the hood, Siri is trapped in a 15-year-old rule-based architecture.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
So modern large language models learn patterns and deduce meaning from context. They understand the intent of your sentence.
Right, they get the gist.
Exactly. But a rule-based system requires a human engineer to sit at a desk and manually program every single logic path.
Oh, wow.
Someone has to manually link the concept of umbrella to rain and then draw another manual link from rain to weather. Just so that if you ask, do I need an umbrella, the system knows to open the weather app.
Precisely.
So Siri's rule-based system is basically a giant choose-your-own-adventure book.
That's a great way to put it.
An engineer has to write every single page and anticipate every single decision tree. It's like trying to build a modern dynamic skyscraper, but demanding every single worker use hand tools and just refusing to learn modern engineering.
Right, and if you ask a question in a phrasing that doesn't correspond to a pre-written page, like adding the word in, the story just ends.
Modern LLMs are more like improv actors, right?
Yeah, exactly. They understand the scene, they know the context, and they can dynamically generate the next line of dialogue based on all the patterns they've studied. What's fascinating here is that it absolutely did not have to be this way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The original founders of Siri, before they were fully absorbed into the Apple ecosystem, had a completely different vision.
What were they going to do?
They didn't want to write every page of that Choose Your Own Adventure book themselves. They wanted Siri to be an app store for AI. Oh, that makes so much sense.
The plan was to let third-party developers plug their own features and knowledge domains directly into the assistant.
But Apple's absolute obsession with total control killed that instantly.
Instantly.
They locked Siri down tight for 5 entire years. Nobody outside of Apple could touch it.
And you just have to compare that approach to what Amazon did with Alexa.
Right. Amazon opened Alexa up to outside developers almost immediately.
Because they embraced an open ecosystem, Alexa scaled from just 10 domains of knowledge to over 1,000 in a couple of years.
While Siri was just left sitting there, completely stuck at 15 domains.
Yeah. And that obsession with secrecy and control didn't just ruin the product. It actively repelled the brilliant minds needed to fix it.
Because AI is so collaborative, right?
Exactly. The field of artificial intelligence operates on a uniquely collaborative open source model. The source makes a crucial point here regarding Google.
The Transformer paper. Yes. When Google researchers invented the Transformer architecture, which is the absolute bedrock of all modern AI, they didn't patent it and lock it in a vault.
They just gave it away.
They published it openly in 2017 in a famous paper called Attention is All You Need.
I want to pause on that paper because the mechanism is mind-blowing.
It really is.
Before the Transformer architecture, AI read text linearly, like a ticker tape. It read word by word, which meant by the time it got to the end of a long paragraph, it had basically forgotten the context at the beginning.
Right.
What that attention paper figured out was how to make the system look at the entire sentence simultaneously. It weighs the importance of every word against every other word in real time, giving the AI actual context.
It is the very foundation that allowed OpenAI to build ChatGPT.
And Google just gave it away to the world.
They did. And that open source ethos is the lifeblood of AI research. Scientists build their careers and their credibility by publishing high-quality papers and having their work tested by peers across the entire industry.
So if you want the best people, you have to let them publish.
That is how you attract top talent. But Apple historically treats its internal projects like state secrets.
Right, the whole silo thing.
Exactly. Teams inside Apple often have zero clue what the team down the hall is working on. Because of those silos, top-tier researchers flat out refuse to work there. It was career suicide.
The talent drain became a massive hemorrhage. The source notes that in the last quarter of 2025 alone, Apple lost 12 core members of their AI team to competitors.
Yeah, that's huge.
The very people who could have fixed Siri left for companies that actually allowed them to collaborate with the broader scientific community.
But the bleeding talent is only half the equation, really.
What's the other half?
Well, even if Apple had somehow convinced those brilliant researchers to stay, they ran headfirst into an ideological brick wall.
Right.
There is a fundamental clash between Apple's traditional corporate DNA and the messy reality of how AI R&D actually functions.
You are talking about the magic paper mindset.
Exactly.
Apple's traditional approach to spending money is incredibly calculated. They sit down, they figure out exactly what the end product is going to be, and then they allocate the budget to build that specific thing.
Yeah, they love defined, contained features.
Think about predictive text on your keyboard, or how your Photos app automatically creates a little memory video set to music.
Yeah.
You know exactly what the output is before you write the code.
But developing foundation models requires the exact opposite approach.
Because it's so unpredictable.
Totally. With large language models, you have to invest billions of dollars in raw computing power and electricity first, just to train the model and discover what it might eventually be capable of doing.
Wow.
You are funding the unknown. You are paying for discovery, not a predefined feature. The source actually quoted an Apple executive saying, "That's not how Apple's wired."
And that wiring traces directly back to Steve Jobs and his philosophy of curating the user experience.
Right, the invisible technology.
Jobs believed that technology should be invisible. They called it the magic paper concept. The device should just magically read your mind, anticipate your needs, and do the work for you.
You shouldn't have to explain yourself to a chatbot.
Exactly. The idea of opening a prompt window and typing instructions into a machine went against everything Apple believed about elegant design.
It is a beautiful philosophy for designing intuitive smartphone menus, but it completely blinded them to the utility of generative AI.
They just ignored it.
They fundamentally rejected the idea that users should have to converse with a machine to get results. So they ignored the LLM revolution entirely while their competitors were spending billions to build it.
Wait, I need to challenge this narrative a bit.
Yeah, go for it.
The source specifically mentions that Apple's software president, Craig Federighi, actually played around with ChatGPT to write code.
He did.
He loved it. He saw the power of it firsthand and supposedly went back to his team and demanded an immediate pivot to catch up.
That's the story.
Yeah. If leadership saw the light in order to pivot, why couldn't the richest company on earth just accelerate their timeline? Apple has over $100 billion in cash on hand. How is it mathematically impossible for them to just buy their way out of this deficit?
Because you can't just walk into a store with $100 billion and buy a ready-made AI infrastructure.
Oh, because of the chips.
Exactly. The bottleneck isn't cash. It is the physical supply chain of AI chips, specifically NVIDIA's advanced GPUs.
Right.
When Federighi finally called for that pivot, it was way too late. The source identifies Apple's stingy spending as the fatal flaw here. Because they refused to fund the unknown early on, they didn't place the hardware orders when it mattered.
So while they were hesitating, everyone else was hoarding the shovels for the gold rush.
Precisely. Even after the pivot, Apple had only provisioned roughly 100,000 AI chips for training their internal models.
And how does that compare?
Let's look at the competition at that exact same moment. Microsoft was running 500,000 chips. Google had over 1 million.
Oh my God.
Furthermore, Apple refused to match the massive multi-million-dollar pay packages that rivals were offering to secure the incredibly rare engineers who actually know how to string 1 million chips together.
So they wouldn't pay the talent either.
No. Start 6 years behind OpenAI, train on a fraction of the hardware, refuse to pay market rate for talent, and your $100 billion in the bank is essentially useless.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Apple's executive team isn't stupid.
Definitely not.
They had to know everything we just discussed. They knew they were mathematically underfunded, they were bleeding talent, and their hardware was vastly inferior.
Right.
Knowing all of that, why did they step onto a stage in 2024 and make a massive, confident announcement about Apple Intelligence?
Because they were desperately trying to pacify a force that is far more demanding and far less forgiving than their user base.
Wall Street.
They were dealing with panicked shareholders.
The numbers from the source paint a very desperate picture. Between June 2023 and June 2024, Apple stock barely moved, growing a mere 6%.
Which is nothing for tech.
Right. And in that exact same window, Google's stock went up 42%, and Meta skyrocketed by an unbelievable 86%.
Yeah, that hurts to look at if you're an Apple investor.
Tim Cook is famous for using massive stock buyback programs where the company literally buys its own shares to artificially reduce supply and inflate the price to keep Wall Street happy. But buybacks can only hide a lack of innovation for so long.
Exactly.
The market realized Apple had absolutely no answer to ChatGPT, and the shareholders were threatening a revolt.
And internally, the situation was grim. They did have an internal chatbot project nicknamed Ajax, but testing showed it was 25% less accurate than ChatGPT.
That's a massive gap.
It is. They were staring at a roadmap that said a genuinely intelligent LLM-powered version of Siri wouldn't realistically be ready until 2026 or 2027.
Which is an eternity.
They could not endure 2 more years of stop stagnation. They needed a narrative immediately.
So they rushed out the Apple Intelligence announcement, fully knowing the tech wasn't there.
This raises an important question. What actually is Apple Intelligence?
Yeah, what is it?
If the underlying foundation models aren't ready, what exactly did they announce on that stage?
If you try to nail down a technical definition, the illusion completely falls apart.
Oh, completely.
The source highlights this deeply uncomfortable interview between tech blogger John Gruber and 2 key Apple executives, AI President John Giannandrea and Software President Craig Federighi.
I remember that interview.
Gruber basically asks them a simple question. What actually qualifies as an Apple Intelligence feature? Because Apple was touting things like Type to Siri as part of this new AI wave. But Type to Siri has existed as a basic accessibility feature since iOS 11 back in 2017.
Yeah, and if you watched that interview, it is physically painful.
It's so awkward.
Gianandrea actually squirms in his seat. He tries to offer a vague explanation that some of it is powered by Apple Intelligence.
And then Federighi steps in.
Right, Federighi has to jump in and awkwardly correct him, admitting that several of the shiny new features like SmartScript and Math Notes aren't actually built on the new foundation models at all. They couldn't give Gruber a straight answer because Apple Intelligence wasn't a real technical category. It was just a marketing bucket.
The source uses a brilliant analogy to explain why this marketing campaign felt so hollow. Sell the hole, not the drill.
That's a classic.
Steve Jobs was the undisputed master of this concept. When Apple launched the LaserWriter printer in 1984, the box was packed with incredibly complex, intimidating technology. Adobe PostScript, Canon laser engines, AppleTalk networking.
Nerd stuff.
Right. But Jobs didn't sell the user a Canon laser engine. He held up a beautifully printed, professional-looking document and said, "Do you want to be able to make this?" He sold the result.
Yeah.
He sold the hole, not the drill.
And they replicated that exact playbook when they launched the original Siri.
Right, exactly.
They didn't sell the public on natural language algorithms or probabilistic routing. They sold a personal assistant that could set your alarm and find a coffee shop.
But look at the tagline for Apple Intelligence. AI for the rest of us.
Yeah, very vague.
They were trying to sell a buzzy technology, a drill, instead of a tangible result. When you ask average users what Apple Intelligence actually does for them, you get blank stares.
Totally.
The branding doesn't describe an action. It describes an anxiety. It was Apple's way of screaming to Wall Street, "Look, we do AI too."
And, well, if you view the announcement solely as a financial instrument, it was a spectacular success.
Oh, it worked.
The market swallowed the narrative whole. The day after Apple Intelligence was revealed, their stock jumped over 7%. By the end of that year, it was up nearly 30%. The shareholders got their growth story, and the panic subsided.
But there's a massive danger in selling a theoretical drill to Wall Street and then handing your actual users a broken tool.
A very broken tool.
This isn't just corporate drama. This directly impacts the incredibly expensive device sitting in your pocket. When the beta features for Apple Intelligence actually started rolling out to the public, the messy reality was impossible to hide.
Yeah, the implementation was disastrous. Their email summary feature, which was supposed to synthesize your inbox, actively hallucinated and prioritized phishing scams that were impersonating banks.
Oh, that's terrible.
Right. Their AI emoji generator, Genmoji, caused severe battery drain. And their notification summaries were completely misrepresenting the headlines of major news articles.
It was so deeply flawed that after just 3 months, Apple had to completely disable the notification summary feature for news apps because they were terrified of the liability of spreading misinformation.
It was a mess.
And let's ground this entirely in our current timeline. It is now May 2026.
Yep.
When Apple originally announced this grand vision, they promised the actual functional LLM-powered version of Siri would be released in early 2025. Then they quietly delayed it, vaguely promising it in the coming year.
And here we are.
We're sitting here halfway through 2026, and we are still waiting. The promised land never arrived. Which brings us right back to the beginning of this deep dive, that quiet billion-dollar concession posted on Google's website.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, relying on your fiercest smartphone competitor to supply the absolute core brain of your next-generation operating system is a terrifyingly precarious position.
This seems crazy.
The source draws a brilliant parallel to Apple's own history to show exactly how bad this could get. We have to look at the Apple Maps disaster of 2012.
Oh, that was a legendary meltdown.
Originally, the Maps app on the iPhone was powered entirely by Google's back-end data. It was a mutually beneficial partnership.
Right.
But then Google launched the Android operating system, and suddenly they were competing for the exact same smartphone buyers.
So what did Google do?
Google started weaponizing their underlying technology. They withheld critical features from the iPhone version, things like turn-by-turn voice navigation and vector-based graphics that allowed for smooth zooming.
Just kept them for themselves.
Yeah. Google made sure those features were exclusive to Android devices, making the iPhone look severely outdated.
Google realized they held the keys to the castle, and they used them to lock Apple out of their own device's potential.
Exactly the kind of leverage Apple despises. So Apple panicked. They realized they didn't control their own destiny, so they aggressively rushed to build their own mapping service from scratch to replace Google.
And we all know how that went.
They launched Apple Maps prematurely, and it was a catastrophic failure. Entire cities were missing. 3D renderings of famous bridges looked like they were melting into the
I
ocean.
remember hospitals being pinned in the middle of grocery store parking lots.
Yes. It
Yeah.
was such a massive public embarrassment that Tim Cook had to issue a rare, humiliating public apology, and the key executive in charge of the software was fired.
So are they walking right back into that exact same trap?
It really seems like it.
If you rent your foundation models from Google, the company that builds the Android OS you are actively trying to destroy in the market, aren't you essentially handing them the knife and offering them your throat?
Yeah.
If Gemini gets a massive leap in reasoning capabilities, what stops Google from keeping that leap exclusive to their Pixel phones and giving the iPhone the delayed, watered-down version?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question hanging over Cupertino right now.
Right.
The rumors cited by the source strongly suggest that Apple's deficit in computing power and talent is so insurmountable that their upcoming 2026 and 2027 Siri iterations will be built directly on Google Gemini tech.
Wow.
It proves they failed to internalize the lesson of their initial Siri mistakes. They fell behind a decade ago because they clung to outdated, controllable technology.
And now they're paying for it.
Now, because they couldn't overcome their own culture of secrecy and their refusal to fund open discovery, they are forced to lease their brain from a rival.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the entirety of the source material we've unpacked today, the overarching irony is just staggering.
It really is.
Apple is a company entirely defined by its absolute obsession with total control. They want to control the hardware, the software, the supply chain, and the narrative. And yet, it is precisely those traits, that stubborn refusal to engage in open research, that unwillingness to invest billions without a guaranteed, predetermined outcome, that has ultimately forced them to surrender control of the most important technology in the world to their fiercest competitor.
It reveals a harsh reality about the modern technological landscape. You can build the most beautiful, seamless, premium hardware ecosystem on the planet.
Right.
You can design the best titanium chassis and the brightest OLED screens, but it is entirely useless if you do not cultivate the internal corporate culture necessary to foster open, messy, collaborative, and incredibly expensive innovation.
You can't just buy it later.
No, you cannot simply mandate an AI breakthrough in a vacuum. You have to be willing to be part of the global community that builds it.
And it leaves you with this final, lingering thought to mull over the next time you pull your phone out of your pocket.
Yeah.
If the defining feature of the next decade of technology is artificial intelligence, and Apple has officially conceded that they have to rent their device's brain from Google, what does it even mean to own an Apple product anymore? If the ghost in the machine actually belongs to someone else, is it really an Apple machine?